In the boardrooms of Detroit, Tokyo, and Berlin, a familiar map is being unrolled again and again across polished tables. It does not highlight the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait anymore. Instead, it shows the sun-bleached highways of northern Mexico, stretching through deserts and industrial zones toward the United States border. For the past 5 years, global corporations have convinced themselves of a comforting story. The solution to their growing dependence on China is not across the Pacific, but right next door. They call it nearshoring. The argument sounds almost too perfect. Why risk shipping containers across oceans threatened by trade wars and naval tensions when the same electric car batteries, computer servers, and medical equipment can be manufactured only a short drive from Texas? On paper, Mexico looks like the ideal replacement. It has a young population while East Asia is aging. It is deeply connected to the American economy through the USMCA trade agreement. It shares a 2,000-mile border with the largest consumer market in the world. During 2023 and 2024, this logic attracted a flood of foreign money. Billions of dollars poured into states like Nuevo León and Baja California. Industrial parks sold out before construction crews finished laying their foundations. Business magazines celebrated what they called the Mexican moment, the beginning of a new industrial miracle that would follow the path once taken by China. But this optimistic vision begins to collapse the moment one leaves the glass towers of capital cities and travels into the corridors where goods actually move. Away from conference rooms and consultant presentations, a different Mexico appears, one rarely included in investor brochures. It is a country where the state is no longer the ultimate authority. In China, the ruling party demands loyalty, but in return it guarantees order. If a company builds a factory, it can be confident that roads will exist, ports will function, and trucks will reach their destinations without armed interruptions. In Mexico, no such guarantee exists. Instead, businesses encounter a cost that does not appear in official tax codes but dominates internal accounting documents. It is known simply as the cartel tax. Once, this phrase described occasional bribes slipped to corrupt officials. Today, it has become a predictable, unavoidable expense written into corporate budgets. Mexican organized crime has undergone a quiet transformation. For decades, drug trafficking defined its operations. If a citizen avoided the black market, violence remained distant, terrible but separate from daily life. That boundary has vanished. Modern cartels no longer see themselves as smugglers alone. They operate as shadow governments with diversified income streams. They discovered that legal commerce offers something drugs never could: stability. Cocaine routes can be intercepted, meth labs can be destroyed, but a factory cannot move and a farm cannot hide. The agricultural sector revealed this new strategy first. In the avocado-growing regions of Michoacán, criminal organizations do not need to plant trees or harvest fruit. They control the roads. Every hectare of land, every truck that leaves an orchard, every crate that enters a packaging center carries a mandatory fee. Payment is not negotiated, it is enforced. Those who resist are punished publicly. Orchards are burned, families are threatened. Local officials who interfere often disappear. In 2025, the mayor of Urupan, the heart of the global avocado trade, was assassinated after attempting to confront the extortion networks that ruled his city. Economists now speak of narco-inflation. When a shopper in New York buys guacamole, a portion of that price silently funds criminal groups thousands of miles away. By late 2025, this hidden tax was draining more than $1 billion each year from legitimate Mexican businesses. It functions like a tariff imposed by men carrying rifles instead of documents. Agriculture was the opening act. Soon, the same system infected the industrial supply chain. For logistics managers, the most frightening statistic of recent years is not fuel prices or labor costs, but cargo theft. In China, stolen freight is so rare it barely registers in national data. In Mexico, it is routine. Hijackings have increased steadily, approaching double-digit growth annually, but numbers fail to capture the reality. These are not petty crimes, they're organized military-style operations. Criminal teams use signal jammers to disable GPS trackers. They establish fake police checkpoints using cloned police vehicles. Spotters communicate by encrypted radio, identifying valuable shipments long before trucks reach their destinations. Electronics, auto parts, industrial metals, medical equipment, anything that can be resold disappears from highways. Entire regions become dangerous after sunset. In states like Puebla and the state of Mexico, drivers know that night travel is an invitation to disaster. More than 80% of hijackings involve violence. Truckers are beaten to extract information, kidnapped to delay police reports, sometimes executed to send a message. For multinational companies, this reality reshapes every financial calculation. Insurance premiums double. Security teams escort convoys like military patrols. Warehouses increase inventory to compensate for losses that are simply accepted as inevitable. Suddenly, the promise of cheap manufacturing collapses under the weight of protection costs. The price of nearshoring is no longer measured only in wages. It is measured in bribes, armored vehicles, ransom payments, and lost cargo. And the problem doesn't end on the highways. Criminal groups have begun penetrating ports and customs offices, the very arteries of international trade. Containers move faster for those who pay. Those who do not watch their goods sit for weeks under the sun until electronics are ruined and contracts canceled. The principle of just-in-time production, which modern industry depends on, collapses when criminals control the calendar. Factories cannot operate efficiently when port operators answer to cartels rather than governments. Officially, authorities describe this violence as battles between rival gangs, a tragedy but not a threat to civilians or investors. In private, business leaders tell a different story. They are building walls around industrial parks. They are hiring private armies disguised as security contractors. Executive protection has become a booming industry. A country cannot serve as the backbone of global manufacturing if it cannot guarantee the safety of a single truck. This reality has begun to reshape political thinking in Washington. Trade policy is no longer only about tariffs and currency values. It is about physical security. A new term is circulating quietly in policy circles: security shoring. The idea is simple. Supply chains should exist only in countries that can protect them with force of law. If Mexico cannot safeguard a shipment of semiconductors, that shipment will eventually be redirected elsewhere, even if wages are higher and distances longer. The tragedy is that Mexico possesses nearly every ingredient required to become an economic superpower. Its geography places it beside the richest consumer market in history. Its population is young and industrially capable. Its resources are vast. Yet all of these advantages are weakened by a single absence: the rule of law. Instead of funding schools or highways, the cartel tax finances weapons, corruption, and endless cycles of violence. It drains investment not through official policy, but through fear. It transforms roads into front lines and factories into fortified compounds. From a distance, Mexico appears to be rising, lifted by the momentum of global supply chain shifts. Up close, it resembles a collection of territories where economic activity continues only with permission from armed groups. And as more corporations calculate their true costs, the original dream of nearshoring begins to fade. What looked like the beginning of a new China increasingly resembles something far more fragile: a system balanced not on productivity or innovation, but on negotiations with criminals.
While the violence on Mexico's highways dominates headlines, another barrier to the country's industrial ambitions grows quietly in the background. It does not carry weapons or wear masks. It hides behind walls, cables, and transformers. It is the electrical grid. To replace China as the center of global manufacturing, a nation needs more than inexpensive labor and proximity to markets. It needs massive amounts of power that is cheap, reliable, and increasingly clean. Modern factories are not driven by human muscle, but by machines, robots, and climate-controlled production lines that consume electricity without pause. China understood this reality decades ago. It poured extraordinary resources into dams, coal plants, nuclear reactors, solar deserts, and ultra-high voltage transmission lines. Entire regions were reshaped to guarantee that when a factory switch is flipped in Shenzhen or Shanghai, the lights never flicker. Energy became the invisible foundation of China's industrial dominance. Mexico chose a different path. Over the last several years, political leadership framed energy as a matter of national pride rather than economic necessity. Private investment, especially in renewable power, was portrayed as foreign interference. Wind farms owned by European firms and solar projects financed by American funds were increasingly treated not as infrastructure but as threats to sovereignty. Clean energy auctions were canceled. Grid regulations were rewritten so that state-owned power plants, many of them outdated and inefficient, would receive priority. Facilities burning heavy fuel oil were placed ahead of cheaper wind and solar stations. The intention was to rescue struggling national companies, but the effect was to paralyze the future. At the same moment, global manufacturers were committing to carbon-neutral supply chains. Automakers promised investors and regulators that their factories would run on clean electricity. Technology firms pledged net zero emissions. New environmental standards were written into contracts and financing agreements. Mexico moved in the opposite direction. Executives in Detroit, Tokyo, and Berlin faced a contradiction. They could move production closer to the United States only by plugging into a grid dominated by some of the dirtiest fuel in the hemisphere. A single factory powered by high-sulfur oil could undo years of carefully constructed environmental credentials. European carbon border taxes would erase profit margins. ESG ratings would collapse. Investment slowed. Projects were delayed. Some were quietly canceled. Even the most celebrated symbol of the nearshoring boom, Tesla's proposed gigafactory in Nuevo León, became a warning sign. Publicly, delays were blamed on interest rates and construction schedules. Privately, energy experts spoke of a deeper problem. The regional grid simply could not deliver the enormous, stable flow of electricity required by such a facility, especially if it had to meet environmental standards. The factory meant to anchor Mexico's manufacturing future faded into uncertainty, a ghost structure drawn on planning documents but absent from the landscape. Then came the blackouts. In the summer of 2024, extreme heat pushed electricity demand beyond what aging infrastructure could supply. Northern industrial cities, the heart of the nearshoring surge, experienced rolling power cuts. Assembly lines in Monterrey and Ciudad Juarez fell silent for hours at a time. For advanced manufacturing, a power outage is not a minor inconvenience, it is financial destruction. Semiconductor plants lose entire batches of silicon wafers when voltage drops for a fraction of a second. Injection molding machines harden into useless blocks of plastic if temperatures fall unexpectedly. Precision equipment is damaged. Contracts are missed. Customers look elsewhere. Industrial parks soon admitted they had reached their limits. New companies arriving with investment plans were told that grid connections could take years. Others were advised to construct their own private power plants if they wished to operate at scale. Nearshoring loses its logic when businesses must build their own energy systems from scratch. Electricity, however, is only half of the equation. The other is water. Northern Mexico, where most export-oriented factories are located, is largely arid. Cities grew rapidly, factories multiplied, and aquifers sank lower each year. The imbalance remained manageable until drought and climate change pushed the system beyond its limits. In 2022 and 2023, Monterrey, the industrial jewel of the country, approached what experts call day zero. Reservoirs dropped to historic lows. Water pressure vanished. Entire neighborhoods went weeks without running water. Millions of residents waited in lines with plastic containers while government trucks distributed emergency supplies. At the same time, enormous bottling plants, breweries, and automobile factories continued to operate. They drew water from deep private wells legally granted years earlier. Pipes ran underground while citizens carried buckets above them. Anger followed thirst. Walls filled with slogans accusing corporations of theft. Protests spread. Social stability wavered. Authorities pressured companies to donate water to prevent unrest, transforming a basic resource into a political bargaining tool. For foreign investors watching from abroad, the message was unmistakable. Water was no longer guaranteed by geography or law. It depended on public tolerance and political calculation. In future droughts, who would lose access first, voters or manufacturers? The answer was obvious. Industries that depend on vast volumes of purified water, such as microchip fabrication, cannot survive under such uncertainty. Microchip factories consume millions of liters each day. They require not only quantity, but purity, filtered to levels approaching chemical perfection. Building such operations in a desert where families ration water for bathing is not merely unethical, it is impossible. The contradiction is structural. Mexico's industrial base is concentrated in the north, close to the United States, while its major water resources lie in the tropical south, far from highways, ports, and skilled labor pools. Moving water on the scale required would demand colossal infrastructure projects, canals, pipelines, and treatment plants measured in decades and trillions of pesos. None are currently planned. Energy shortages and water scarcity feed into a broader weakness: infrastructure. China's rise was paved in concrete and steel. High-speed rail stitched provinces together. Automated ports processed ships in hours. Highways extended like arteries from coast to interior. Mexico invested little by comparison. Road maintenance lagged. Ports grew congested. Rail lines aged and were frequently blocked by protests, criminal groups, or labor disputes. Logistics slowed. Meanwhile, billions of dollars were directed towards projects chosen for political symbolism rather than economic necessity. Tourist railways through jungles and massive oil refineries consumed resources that might have modernized grids, ports, and highways. A partially built international airport near Mexico City, intended to become a global hub, was canceled after construction had already reached advanced stages, sending shockwaves through the investment community. Contracts appeared fragile. Policy appeared reversible. Predictability vanished. These decisions accumulated into a hard ceiling on growth. Mexico could absorb overflow production from Asia, the assembly of furniture, appliances, and vehicle components. It could operate as a regional workshop. But it could not become the workshop of the world, not without electricity that never fails, not without water that never runs dry, not without roads that remain open regardless of who controls the night.
The limitations of infrastructure and resources form only one side of the wall blocking Mexico's industrial ascent. The other side is built from law, politics, and a slow erosion of trust that no factory can repair. Global manufacturing does not move merely toward low costs. It moves towards certainty. Executives calculate risks the way engineers calculate pressure. Corruption, contract disputes, sudden regulation changes, and political retaliation are not abstract concepts to them. They are numbers in spreadsheets that determine whether billions of dollars will be committed or redirected elsewhere. In recent years, Mexico's legal environment has grown increasingly unpredictable. Court rulings reversing energy reforms were ignored or delayed. Regulatory agencies were reshaped to follow political priorities. Independent watchdogs lost funding. Long-term contracts signed under previous administrations were questioned, renegotiated, or publicly condemned. To domestic audiences, these actions were framed as restoring national dignity. To foreign investors, they sounded like a warning siren. Factories require decades to recover their costs. A semiconductor plant or automotive platform is not built for 5 years of profit, but for 30. When policies shift every election cycle, long-term planning collapses. No corporation announces this openly. Instead, feasibility studies grow more cautious. Board approvals become slower. Capital quietly flows to countries where tomorrow looks more like today. Vietnam, Indonesia, India, and even parts of Eastern Europe have taken advantage of this hesitation. They cannot replace China entirely, but each absorbs a fraction of the manufacturing tide that might once have reached Mexico. Yet even if laws stabilized and infrastructure improved, Mexico would face another obstacle that few policymakers openly discuss: scale. China's industrial miracle was not just about factories, it was about density. Entire cities specialized in a single product category. One region for shoes, another for electronics, another for machine parts. Tens of thousands of suppliers clustered within driving distance. Components traveled hours, not weeks. This ecosystem created an industrial gravity field. When a company moved in, everything it needed already existed. Mexico's industrial zones are fragmented by comparison. A car factory may import engines from one country, electronics from another, and specialty metals from a third. Borders remain necessary. Customs delays remain real. Ports remain crowded. Every missing link adds cost. Every delay weakens competitiveness. China's advantage is not wages anymore. It is completeness. Mexico, even under perfect conditions, would require decades to build such density. And time is not neutral. While Mexico struggles with power shortages and water stress, the world is shifting again. Automation accelerates. Factories require fewer workers. Robots replace assembly lines once designed around human hands. Artificial intelligence optimizes logistics, design, and inventory. Manufacturing no longer chases labor alone. It chases stability, technology, and integration. This transition weakens Mexico's traditional advantage. Low-cost labor matters less when machines do most of the work. Proximity matters less when supply chains are digitally synchronized. What remains crucial is energy, data infrastructure, and legal reliability. Once again, Mexico finds itself behind the curve. Meanwhile, the global economy itself is changing shape. Trade wars hardened into permanent barriers, sanctions became normalized, supply chains fractured along political lines. The world no longer functions as one marketplace, it functions as competing economic blocs. The United States and its allies form one sphere, China and its partners form another. Each side builds its own technology standards, payment systems, shipping routes, and industrial networks. This is economic balkanization. In such a world, countries are no longer neutral factories serving everyone equally, they become strategic assets or strategic risks. Mexico sits uncomfortably in between. It is economically tied to the United States, legally bound through trade agreements and geographically inseparable. But it is also dependent on Chinese components, machines, and financing. If tensions escalate further, Mexico may be forced to choose. That choice would not be theoretical. American policymakers already speak of friendshoring, relocating sensitive industries only to politically aligned nations. Semiconductors, batteries, aerospace components, and advanced AI hardware are treated not as products but as weapons of economic power. Countries that cannot guarantee political alignment will not receive these factories, no matter how cheap their labor. Mexico's domestic politics complicate this alignment. Nationalist rhetoric, disputes with foreign energy companies, and resistance to environmental commitments all weaken its image as a stable strategic partner. Again, no formal announcement is made. Decisions occur quietly. A factory is built in Arizona instead of Sonora. A battery plant goes to Canada instead of Coahuila. A chip facility opens in Texas instead of Tamaulipas. Maps change one pin at a time. Nearshoring continues, but only for lower-risk industries. Textiles, furniture, basic auto parts, appliances. The sophisticated core of modern manufacturing stays elsewhere. The gap widens. Mexico becomes busy but not powerful, industrial but not dominant, essential but replaceable. Inside the country, this reality produces a strange contradiction. Employment grows, export numbers rise, industrial parks expand, politicians declare success, yet wages stagnate, productivity plateaus, tax revenue fails to match expectations, public services deteriorate. The nation works harder without becoming richer. This is the middle-income trap in industrial form. Factories multiply, but innovation does not. Technology is imported, not created. Decisions are made abroad. Profits flow outward. The economy grows, but control does not. And beneath it all, the original problems remain unsolved. Electricity grids still strain in summer. Aquifers still sink. Rail lines still choke. Courts still hesitate. Policies still reverse. Each year without reform deepens the structural gap between Mexico and the countries that shape global production. History offers a cruel lesson. Industrial revolutions do not wait. They reward speed, coordination, and long-term planning. Nations that hesitate become suppliers. Nations that invest become centers. Mexico stands at a narrow crossing point. It can accept its role as a regional workshop, useful but limited, tied to cycles of foreign demand and vulnerable to every external shock. Or it can attempt something far harder, a political consensus that outlives elections, massive investment in energy, water, and logistics, legal institutions shielded from ideology, education aligned with advanced manufacturing, environmental policy compatible with global markets, security strong enough that trucks move at night without fear. This transformation would take decades. It would demand sacrifice. It would anger powerful interests. It would require thinking beyond the next election. So far, no such project exists. Instead, the country drifts. Factories arrive. Factories wait. Factories leave. The dream of replacing China remains alive in speeches, headlines, and conference presentations. But dreams do not power machines. They do not cool reactors. They do not purify water. They do not protect contracts. They do not move containers through ports. The world is dividing into fortified economic continents. Production is becoming political. Technology is becoming strategic. And manufacturing is no longer about where things are cheap. It's about where the future is safe. Mexico, for now, is close. But closeness is not enough. In a fractured global economy, only nations that build unbreakable foundations will inherit the factories of tomorrow. The rest will assemble yesterday's products under tomorrow's uncertainty.